Daniel Carter had always believed that hard work and dedication would be enough to keep his family afloat. But standing in the sterile corridor of County General Hospital at 2:47 a.m., clutching his 6-year-old daughter Emma against his chest, while Dr. Singh delivered words that would shatter his world, he realized how wrong he'd been. Emma's small fingers traced the stubble on his jaw, her breath warm against his neck as she dozed fitfully in his arms, unaware that everything she knew was about to change. The day had started like any other Tuesday. Daniel had woken before dawn to make Emma's breakfast, carefully cutting her toast into triangles the way she liked, humming softly while coffee percolated in the ancient machine his late wife had loved. He'd kissed Emma's forehead as she stumbled sleepily to the kitchen table, her wild auburn curls catching the morning light streaming through their small kitchen window. At Morrison Electric, he'd been rewiring the old Hendricks farmhouse when the pain hit him like a freight train, radiating from his chest down his left arm with such intensity that he collapsed among the scattered tools and copper wire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The other electricians had found him unconscious, his face pale and lips tinged blue, and Jake Morrison himself had ridden in the ambulance while his foreman called Eleanor Johnson, the retired teacher next door who watched Emma after school. The paramedics worked over Daniel with practiced efficiency, their clinical conversations floating around him as consciousness came and went like waves against a distant shore. Now, hours later, Dr. Singh stood before him in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor, her dark eyes compassionate but unflinching as she delivered the diagnosis that would redefine the rest of his life. "I'm afraid it's not your heart, Mr. Carter," she said quietly, glancing at Emma's sleeping form. "The tests show advanced pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The pain you experienced was the tumor pressing against surrounding organs." Daniel's world tilted sideways. He'd heard of pancreatic cancer, knew it was one of the worst kinds, the kind that took people quickly and without mercy. The words seemed to echo in the empty hallway, bouncing off the institutional green walls and settling into his bones like ice. "How long?" he managed to whisper, his voice catching in his throat. Dr. Singh's expression softened, but her words remained clinical, precise. "With aggressive treatment, we might buy you 6 months, maybe 8 if we're fortunate." "I'm sorry, Daniel. I wish I had better news." She paused, studying his face. "The tumor is inoperable, given its location and size. We can try chemotherapy to slow its growth, but we need to be realistic about expectations." Emma stirred in his arms, murmuring something about dinosaurs and ice cream, and Daniel felt his heart break into 1,000 pieces. 6 months. His daughter would be 7 in the spring, just learning to read chapter books, still afraid of thunderstorms and the monster she was convinced lived in their basement. He thought of all the moments he would miss. Her first day of high school, teaching her to drive, walking her down the aisle at her wedding, holding his grandchildren. The future he'd taken for granted evaporated like morning mist. "There has to be something," Daniel said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Some treatment, some trial, something you haven't tried yet." He shifted Emma's weight, drawing strength from her small body pressed against his chest. "I can't leave her. She's already lost her mother. She can't lose me, too." Dr. Singh nodded slowly, understanding flickering in her eyes. She'd seen this desperation before, the way parents and children clung to hope, even when medical science offered little comfort. "We'll fight it, Daniel. I promise you that. But I need you to understand what we're facing, so you can make informed decisions about treatment and," she glanced again at Emma, "about preparing her for what's coming." The ride home in Jake Morrison's pickup truck passed in a blur of streetlights and Daniel's racing thoughts. Emma had woken up confused and cranky, demanding to know why they were at the hospital and why Daddy looked so sad. He'd managed to deflect her questions with promises of pancakes for dinner and her favorite cartoon, but he could see the worry in her green eyes, so much like her mother's, too perceptive for her age. "Ease." Eleanor met them at the front door of their small craftsman house on Maple Street, her gray hair pinned back and flour dusting her apron from an evening of stress baking. She took one look at Daniel's face and gathered Emma into her arms without a word, carrying the tired child inside while Daniel sat heavily on the front porch steps, his head in his hands. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the scent of Eleanor's rose garden and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. 6 months. The number echoed in his mind like a countdown clock, each second ticking away the time he had left with his daughter. But as he sat there in the darkness, listening to Emma's laughter drift through the open window as Eleanor made her a snack, something hardened in Daniel's chest. Not acceptance, but defiance. He would not go gently. He would fight this disease with everything he had, for every day, every hour, every precious moment with Emma that he could steal from death itself. The morning after brought no relief, only the harsh reality of sunlight streaming through Daniel's bedroom window while Emma bounced on his bed chattering about her upcoming school project on butterflies. Her innocence was both a blessing and a burden as Daniel forced himself to sit up, his body already feeling foreign and treacherous after the previous night's revelations. Every movement seemed to carry the weight of his diagnosis, as if the cancer had somehow made itself known to his muscles and joints overnight. Eleanor had stayed the night, sleeping on the couch and rising early to make coffee and scrambled eggs that filled the house with normalcy. She moved through their kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that routine was armor against chaos, humming softly while Emma helped set the table with mismatched plates and carefully folded paper napkins. "Daddy, Mrs. Johnson says she can help me with my butterfly project," Emma announced, syrup dripping from her fork as she attacked her pancakes with 7-year-old determination. "Did you know some butterflies live for only 2 weeks, but monarch butterflies can live up to 8 months and fly thousands of miles?" The irony wasn't lost on Daniel, and he saw Eleanor's quick glance across the kitchen table, her understanding evident in the way she squeezed his shoulder as she refilled his coffee cup. 8 months. Even the monarchs had him beat, but Emma's enthusiasm sparked something in his chest that felt suspiciously like hope. After Eleanor walked Emma to school, Daniel found himself alone in the house for the first time since the diagnosis, surrounded by the accumulated life of a single father and his daughter. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator like colorful armor. Stick figure families, rainbow houses, and dozens of drawings featuring daddy and daughter holding hands under smiling suns. Her backpack hung by the door next to his tool belt, their evening routine of homework and dinner dishes suddenly precious beyond measure. He pulled out his laptop, a second-hand machine that wheezed and hummed like an old dog, and began researching. Pancreatic cancer survival rates, experimental treatments, clinical trials, alternative therapies, anything that might buy him time. The statistics were grim, but buried in medical journals and patient forums, he found stories of people who had defied the odds, who had stretched months into years through sheer stubbornness and luck. By the time Emma bounded through the front door that afternoon, her backpack bouncing against her legs and her face flushed from running, Daniel had filled a notebook with treatment options, doctor recommendations, and dietary changes that might help slow the cancer's progress. More importantly, he had made a decision that felt like choosing life over death. "Emma, come here, sweetheart," he said, patting his lap as she dumped her backpack and kicked off her sneakers with typical 7-year-old abandon. She climbed into his arms, her small body warm and solid against his chest, smelling of chalk dust and playground adventure. "Daddy, are you sick?" she asked, with the directness that only children possess, her green eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his throat tight. "Mrs. Johnson had sad eyes today, and you were making funny noises in your sleep last night." Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. He had promised himself he wouldn't lie to her, but the full truth was too heavy for her small shoulders. "Yes, sweetheart, I am sick, but I want you to know something very important." He tilted her chin up so she was looking directly at him. "I promise you that I will fight this as hard as I can. I promise I will be here for all your important days, your birthday parties, your school plays, when you learn to ride a bike without training wheels." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Will you be here when I get married, like in the movies?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow, but he didn't hesitate. "Yes, baby girl, I will walk you down that aisle if I have to crawl to get there." "That's a promise, and you know Daddy always keeps his promises." She wrapped her arms around his neck then, holding him with a fierceness that surprised him, her small body trembling slightly as she absorbed this new reality. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered into his neck. "I'll help you fight the sick away." That evening, as Eleanor helped Emma with her butterfly project at the kitchen table, cutting out pictures of monarchs and painting coffee filters in brilliant oranges and blacks. Daniel called Dr. Singh's office to schedule his first chemotherapy session. The nurse on the phone was kind but matter-of-fact, explaining the process, the side effects, the things he would need to prepare for in the coming weeks. Later, after Emma had gone to bed clutching a stuffed elephant that had belonged to her mother, Daniel sat on the front porch with Eleanor, watching fireflies blink in and out of existence in the gathering darkness. The night air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of honeysuckle and the distant sound of children playing in nearby yards. "You know," Eleanor said quietly, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm as she worked on what looked like a small sweater, "my grandmother lived 3 years past her cancer diagnosis when the doctors gave her 6 months. She always said it was because she had too much left to do to die on schedule." Daniel nodded, understanding the gift she was offering. Not false hope, but the acknowledgement that medicine didn't always have the final word. "Emma's butterfly project," he said after a moment. 8 months for a monarch butterfly. They make that journey to Mexico and back, thousands of miles, because something inside them says they have to keep flying. Eleanor smiled, her fingers never pausing in their work. Exactly. Sometimes the heart knows things that charts and statistics don't. She glanced toward Emma's bedroom window, where a small nightlight cast dancing shadows of butterflies across the ceiling. "That little girl in there is going to give you reasons to keep flying that you haven't even thought of yet." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared at the screen door in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy, I forgot to tell you something important about monarchs. Mrs. Peterson said they can't fly if their wings are wet, but they wait for the sun to dry them, and then they fly even higher than before." Daniel's throat constricted with emotion as he gathered his daughter into his lap once more, her small body fitting perfectly against his chest. "That's good to know, sweetheart. Very good to know." That night, after Eleanor had gone home and Emma was fast asleep, Daniel sat in his daughter's doorway watching her breathe, her chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of childhood. The butterfly nightlight cast moving shadows on the walls. Monarchs in eternal flight, their wings carrying them toward destinations they couldn't see but somehow knew they had to reach. Tomorrow would bring the first round of treatments, the beginning of a fight that statistics said he couldn't win. But tonight, in the soft darkness of his daughter's room, with the promise he had made to her echoing in his heart, Daniel Carter chose to believe in miracles. The chemotherapy suite at County General looked nothing like the sterile, frightening place Daniel had imagined. Soft yellow walls were decorated with cheerful paintings of gardens and seascapes, and the reclining chairs were positioned near large windows that looked out onto a courtyard where patients could watch birds visiting a small fountain. Dr. Singh had explained that the environment was designed to promote healing and calm, but as Daniel settled into chair number 7 for his first treatment, all he could think about was Emma's face when he dropped her off at Eleanor's that morning. "I made you something for courage," Emma had announced, pressing a small folded paper into his palm as Eleanor guided her toward the breakfast table. Inside was a drawing of a superhero with Daniel's face, cape flowing behind him as he punched a black blob labeled, "Bad Sick Stuff." At the bottom, in Emma's careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Daddy the Cancer Fighter." Now, as the IV needle slipped into his arm and the clear liquid began its slow drip into his bloodstream, Daniel clutched that drawing like a talisman. The oncology nurse, a woman named Janet, with kind eyes and scrubs covered in cartoon cats, had praised Emma's artwork and taped it to the IV pole where Daniel could see it throughout the 3-hour treatment. "First time?" asked the woman in the chair next to him, her voice warm despite the exhaustion that lined her face. Her name was Dorothy, and she'd been coming here every 2 weeks for the past year, fighting breast cancer with the same determination Daniel was trying to muster for his own battle. "Is it that obvious?" Daniel managed, already feeling the slight nausea that Dr. Singh had warned him about. The anti-nausea medication made him drowsy, but his mind refused to quiet, spinning with worry about Emma and work and the dozen practical concerns that cancer had made suddenly urgent. Dorothy laughed, a sound like wind chimes that made other patients look up and smile. "Honey, you've got that deer-in-headlights look that we all had on day 1. It gets easier, I promise. Not the cancer part, that stays hard, but the treatment part becomes routine. You'll see." Over the next 3 hours, Daniel learned the rhythm of the chemotherapy suite. Patients dozed or read or worked on puzzles, their IV poles standing sentinel beside chairs that had become as familiar as favorite armchairs. Some patients came alone. Others brought family members who knitted or graded papers or simply held hands in comfortable silence. There was a camaraderie here, an unspoken understanding among people who were all fighting the same invisible enemy. By the time Daniel arrived home that evening, the fatigue had settled into his bones like fog. Emma met him at the door with a concerned expression that was far too mature for her 7 years, studying his face as if she could diagnose his condition from the paleness around his eyes. "Did the medicine work, Daddy?" she asked, taking his hand and leading him to the couch with the careful attention of a nurse. Eleanor had clearly prepared her for his return, because she had arranged pillows and a glass of water on the coffee table, along with saltine crackers that someone had told her might help with his stomach. "It's going to take time, sweetheart," Daniel explained, pulling her close as he sank into the cushions. "The medicine has to build up in my system to fight the cancer. It's like, remember when you had that bad cough last winter, and you had to take medicine for 10 days before you felt better?" Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand patting his arm in a gesture she'd learned from watching Eleanor comfort people. "Mrs. Johnson made soup for dinner. She said sick people need soup and stories and lots of hugs." True to her word, Eleanor appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray with bowls of chicken soup that smelled like comfort and healing. She'd been quietly managing their household for the past week, appearing each morning with fresh groceries and disappearing each evening after Emma was tucked into bed, never making Daniel feel like a burden, but simply becoming part of their routine as naturally as sunrise. The next few weeks established a new normal that revolved around treatment schedules and energy management. Daniel learned to recognize the pattern of his body's response to chemotherapy. The first day's bone-deep exhaustion, the second day's nausea, the third day's gradual return to something approximating normalcy. Emma learned it too, becoming expert at recognizing Daddy's tired days and adjusting her needs accordingly. On his good days, Daniel tried to cram in as much normalcy as possible. He helped Emma with homework at the kitchen table, took her to the park to feed the ducks, read bedtime stories with voices for all the characters that made her giggle until she hiccuped. These moments felt stolen from time itself, precious beyond measure because he knew how easily they could disappear. The physical changes came gradually at first, then with increasing speed. His hair began falling out in clumps during his second week of treatment, leaving patches of scalp visible through what had once been thick brown hair. Emma discovered this one morning when she climbed into his bed for their usual weekend snuggle, her small fingers tracing the smooth spots with the careful touch of someone examining a wounded bird. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice small and worried. "No, sweetheart, it doesn't hurt. It's just what the medicine does sometimes." Daniel had prepared for this moment, had even practiced the conversation with Eleanor. But Emma's acceptance surprised him. "Maybe we should shave it all off," she announced with 7-year-old logic. "That way it can grow back all at the same time, like grass after winter." So that afternoon, Eleanor brought over her late husband's electric razor, and Emma supervised while Daniel shaved off what remained of his hair. She insisted on sweeping up the clippings, treating the task with the solemnity of a sacred ritual. When he was finished, she studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror for a long moment before delivering her verdict. "You look like a fighter now, Daddy, like the superheroes in my books." That night, as Daniel tucked Emma into bed, she presented him with another drawing. This one showing a bald superhero flying through clouds with a little girl riding on his back. "This is us flying to the future," she explained, pointing to a small church in the distance. "That's where I'm getting married, and you're flying me there because you promised." Daniel's eyes burned with unshed tears as he taped the drawing to his bedroom wall, next to the growing collection of Emma's artwork that had become his daily reminders of why he was fighting. 6 months, Dr. Singh had said. He was already halfway through that timeline, but something had shifted in his body and spirit during these weeks of treatment, and Emma's unwavering faith. The cancer was still there. The scans showed it clearly, but it had stopped growing, suspended in some medical limbo that no one quite understood. Dr. Singh spoke cautiously about stable disease and unexpected responses, but Daniel preferred Emma's explanation. The cancer was scared of their superhero team and was hiding until they weren't looking. As autumn deepened and Emma's 8th birthday approached, Daniel allowed himself to think beyond the 6-month deadline for the first time. The future remained uncertain, clouded with the possibility of relapse and progression, but Emma's laughter echoing through their small house each evening sounded like victory to him. Maybe Dorothy from the chemotherapy suite had been right. Maybe it did get easier. Not the cancer part, which would always be hard, but the living part. The choosing to believe in tomorrow despite everything medical science said about today. In the quiet hours before dawn, when Emma slept peacefully in her room and the house settled around them like a protective embrace, Daniel Carter dared to hope that 6 months might become 8, and 8 might become 12, and 12 might become long enough to keep the promise he'd made to a little girl who believed her daddy could fly. The calendar on Daniel's kitchen wall marked 6 months and 1 day since his diagnosis, and Emma had circled the date in red crayon with the enthusiasm of a child marking Christmas. Morning. She'd been planning this celebration for weeks, secretly conspiring with Eleanor to bake a chocolate cake that read, "Still Here," in bright yellow frosting letters that dripped slightly down the sides like sweet tears of joy. "Daddy, you did it," Emma announced as she carried the cake to their small dining room table, her face glowing with pride. "The doctor said 6 months, but you're still here fighting the bad sick stuff." She'd decorated the dining room with streamers made from construction paper, each one bearing a drawing of Daniel in his superhero cape, and the effect was both heartbreaking and triumphant. Daniel pulled his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering sweetness of cake batter on her fingers. 6 months ago he'd sat in Dr. Singh's office preparing for the end of his story, but here he was, weaker than before but undeniably alive, watching his 8-year-old daughter celebrate what felt like a miracle wrapped in homemade frosting. The celebration was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door, followed by the entrance of someone Daniel hadn't expected to see again. Michael Carter stood in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from travel and his face carrying the uncomfortable expression of a man who'd come to attend a funeral only to find a birthday party instead. "Michael," Daniel said, rising slowly from his chair, his body still aching from the previous week's chemotherapy session. His younger brother looked older than his 35 years, his dark hair already showing threads of silver at the temples, his success as a financial advisor in Chicago evident in everything from his watch to his leather shoes. "Danny," Michael's voice carried the careful tone of someone walking through a minefield. "I got your message about the diagnosis. I came as soon as I could get away from work." His eyes took in the festive decorations, Emma's beaming face, the cake that proclaimed ongoing life rather than impending death. "I see I may have misunderstood the urgency." Emma, with the social fearlessness of childhood, bounded over to her uncle and grabbed his hand. "Uncle Michael, you came for Daddy's still alive party. Do you want cake? I made it myself with Mrs. Johnson, and it has 3 layers because Daddy's been sick for 3 seasons now, but he's still fighting." Michael's expression softened as he looked down at his niece, this vibrant little girl who barely remembered him from his last visit 2 years ago. "Still alive party?" he repeated, glancing at Daniel with something that might have been confusion or admiration. "The doctor said 6 months," Daniel explained, his voice steady despite the tension he could feel building in the room. "Today makes 6 months and 1 day." Emma wanted to celebrate. Over the next hour, as Emma regaled Michael with stories of Daddy's treatments and her superhero drawings, and the way they'd turned cancer fighting into a family adventure, Daniel watched his brother's face cycle through a dozen emotions. Disbelief gave way to concern, which shifted to something approaching awe, as Emma described her father's determination with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting weather conditions. Later, after Emma had gone to bed clutching a new stuffed animal that Michael had produced from his briefcase like a nervous magic trick, the 2 brothers sat on the front porch in the kind of silence that stretched back to their childhood. Michael had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, making him look more like the boy who'd followed Daniel around their father's construction sites than the polished professional who'd walked through the door earlier. "I came here to help you get your affairs in order," Michael said finally, his voice quiet in the evening air. "I brought legal documents, life insurance paperwork, information about schools Emma might attend. I thought—" He paused, running his hands through his hair. "I thought I'd be planning a funeral, not eating celebration cake." Daniel nodded, understanding his brother's confusion. "The statistics haven't changed, Michael." Dr. Singh still won't make any promises about how much time I have. But something's happening that nobody expected. The cancer's not growing. It's not gone, but it's not getting worse either. And you think what? That you can beat this thing through sheer willpower? Michael's tone carried the skepticism of someone who'd built his career on analyzing risk and probability. Danny, I've researched pancreatic cancer. The survival rates. I know the survival rates, Daniel interrupted, his voice sharper than he'd intended. I know them better than you do, trust me. But I also know that little girl upstairs is counting on me to keep fighting. And I'll be damned if I'm going to give up, because a chart says I should. Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying his brother's profile in the porch light. Daniel had always been the stubborn one. The brother who'd refused to quit football even after breaking his collarbone. Who'd worked 2 jobs to put himself through trade school. Who'd somehow held their family together after their father's drinking had torn everything else apart. The medical bills must be crushing you, Michael said finally, shifting the conversation to practical ground. Even with insurance, cancer treatment. Daniel's silence was answer enough. The bills had been piling up despite his insurance coverage. Co-pays and deductibles and experimental treatments that weren't fully covered, creating a mountain of debt that grew larger each month. He'd been picking up what electrical work he could manage between treatments, but his energy was limited, and his clients were beginning to worry about his reliability. Let me help, Michael said, the words coming out in a rush. I know we haven't been close since Dad died, and I know I should have been here before now. But I'm here now, and I want to help. With the bills, with Emma, with whatever you need. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel looked at his brother, seeing past the expensive clothes and professional success to the guilt that had been eating at Michael for years. They'd both left home as soon as they could, but only Daniel had stayed close enough to deal with their father's final years, to handle the funeral, to carry the weight of family responsibility alone. I don't need charity, Michael. It's not charity, it's family. Michael's voice carried a determination that reminded Daniel of their childhood, when his little brother had insisted on following him everywhere, despite being 3 years younger and half his size. Emma's my niece. You're my brother. I should have been here from the beginning. That night, after Michael had settled into the guest room that hadn't been used since Emma's last birthday party, Daniel sat in his daughter's doorway watching her sleep. The superhero drawings on her walls seemed to glow in the soft light from the hallway, and he could hear the quiet sounds of his brother moving around downstairs, probably reviewing the financial documents he'd brought from Chicago. 6 months and 1 day, the timeline that was supposed to mark the end of his story had become instead a new beginning, a chance to rebuild relationships that had been strained by years of distance and pride. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about cake and uncles and promises, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with cancer and everything to do with hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more treatments, more uncertainty, more bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. But tonight, for the first time since his diagnosis, Daniel Carter wasn't facing those challenges alone. His brother was downstairs figuring out how to help, Eleanor was next door ready to support them however they needed, and Emma was dreaming of superheroes who kept their promises no matter what the statistics said. Maybe breaking the timeline wasn't just about surviving longer than expected. Maybe it was about discovering that family could be rebuilt, that pride could be set aside for love, and that miracles sometimes came disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings, when brothers remembered how to be brothers again. The heat of summer settled over their small town like a heavy blanket, and Daniel found himself struggling more than he cared to admit. The chemotherapy that had once seemed manageable now left him bedridden for days at a time, his body rejecting food and water with increasing frequency. Emma, now 9 and wise beyond her years, had taken to leaving glasses of ice water on his nightstand and drawing him pictures of cool places, Arctic landscapes with polar bears and underwater scenes with peaceful fish that she said would help him feel better. Michael had been true to his word, staying far longer than the weekend visit he'd originally planned. He'd taken a leave of absence from his Chicago firm, explaining to confused colleagues that his brother needed him, and had set up a makeshift office in Daniel's spare bedroom where he managed both his own clients and Daniel's increasingly complex medical bills. The transformation from distant brother to dedicated caregiver hadn't been smooth, but it had been steady, marked by small gestures, like learning to make Emma's favorite grilled cheese sandwiches and figuring out how to braid her hair for school. "Daddy's having a hard week," Emma explained to her friend Anna Rivera as the two girls played in the backyard while Daniel dozed on the living room couch. Anna's mother had started bringing her over more frequently, understanding without being told that Emma needed the normalcy of childhood friendship even as her world revolved around treatment schedules and doctor appointments. Anna, a year older and possessed of the kind of practical wisdom that comes from growing up in a house full of siblings, nodded solemnly. "My grandpa was sick like that before he went to heaven. Mama says sometimes people have to rest a lot to get their strength back." Through the open window, Daniel could hear their conversation and felt the familiar stab of guilt that had become his constant companion. Emma shouldn't have to explain his illness to her friends, shouldn't have to tiptoe around the house when he was sleeping off the effects of chemotherapy, shouldn't have to grow up so fast in a world where cancer dictated the rhythm of their days. The financial strain that Michael's presence had temporarily eased was mounting again despite his brother's help. Daniel's work had dwindled to almost nothing as his energy waned, and even with Michael covering the mortgage and utilities, the medical bills continued to arrive like unwelcome visitors. Insurance covered the basic treatments, but the experimental therapies Dr. Singh was suggesting required copays that might as well have been written in astronomical numbers. "We need to talk about practical things," Michael said one evening after Emma had gone to bed, settling into the chair beside Daniel's recliner with the careful movements of someone approaching a difficult conversation. "About work, about money, about what happens if I get worse," Daniel finished, his voice hoarse from the latest round of treatments. "I know. I've been thinking about it too." He gestured toward a stack of papers on the coffee table. Disability applications, insurance forms, documents that represented the bureaucratic side of dying. "I hate that she has to hear us talk about this stuff." Michael's expression softened. "She's tougher than you think, Danny, tougher than either of us were at her age." He paused, studying his brother's gaunt face in the lamplight. "But you're right, that we need to make plans. Real plans, not just hope and prayer." The next morning brought a crisis that forced their hand. Daniel collapsed in the bathroom while getting ready for Emma's school play, his legs simply giving out as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. Emma found him there, struggling to pull himself up using the sink, and her scream brought both Michael and Eleanor running from different parts of the house. "Daddy!" Emma's voice was sharp with panic as she knelt beside him, her small hands fluttering over his face and arms as if she could somehow fix whatever was broken. "Uncle Michael, something's wrong with Daddy." The trip to the emergency room became a blur of worried faces and hushed conversations between medical professionals who spoke in the careful tones reserved for family members who weren't quite ready to hear bad news. Dr. Singh met them there, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern as she reviewed Daniel's latest blood work and scan results. "The cancer's progressing," she explained to Michael and Eleanor while Daniel was sedated and Emma sat in the waiting room with Anna's mother. "His body's been fighting for over a year now, and it's starting to show the strain. We need to talk about adjusting his treatment plan, maybe consider palliative care options." Michael felt the words hit him like physical blows. Palliative care? He knew what that meant, even if Dr. Singh was too kind to say it directly. They were moving from fighting the cancer to managing Daniel's comfort, from hoping for more time to preparing for the end of time. But when Daniel woke up hours later, the first thing he asked about wasn't his prognosis or his pain medication. "Emma's play," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's tonight. She's been practicing her lines for weeks." "Danny, you can't," Michael started, but Eleanor interrupted him with a look that could have stopped traffic. "Of course you'll be there," she said firmly, adjusting Daniel's hospital blanket with the efficient care of someone who'd spent her teaching career managing minor crises. "We'll figure out how to make it work." And somehow, they did. Michael borrowed a wheelchair from the hospital. Eleanor packed a bag with blankets and pillows, and Dr. Singh agreed to discharge Daniel for the evening with strict instructions about returning if his condition worsened. By 6 o'clock, Daniel was sitting in the front row of Emma's elementary school auditorium, wrapped in a quilt that Eleanor had made, and flanked by his brother and their substitute grandmother like bodyguards protecting something precious. When Emma appeared on stage as a brave pioneer girl, her face glowing under the stage lights as she delivered her lines with perfect clarity, Daniel felt tears streaming down his cheeks. This was what he was fighting for. Not just more time, but moments like this when life felt bigger than illness. When his daughter's joy could fill up all the empty spaces that cancer had carved out of their world. After the play, as families milled around taking pictures and congratulating young performers, Emma ran straight to Daniel's wheelchair and threw her arms around his neck. "You came," she whispered into his ear. "I knew you would come." "I promised, didn't I?" Daniel whispered back, holding her close and breathing in the scent of hairspray and stage makeup that would forever remind him of this perfect moment. "I always keep my promises." That night, as Michael helped Daniel back into bed and Eleanor settled Emma into her room with stories about how proud they all were of her performance, Daniel realized something had shifted in their family dynamic. They were no longer just surviving his illness. They were learning to live around it, to create joy and normalcy in the spaces between treatments and setbacks. The cancer was winning the medical battle, claiming more of his strength each day. But here in their small house on Maple Street, surrounded by people who loved them both, Daniel and Emma were winning something else entirely. They were proving that family could be built from choice as well as blood, that love could multiply instead of divide when shared among many hearts, and that promises made to a 9-year-old girl could become the foundation for miracles that no medical textbook had ever documented. Michael, unpacking his laptop to work late into the night on insurance appeals and treatment options, had stopped talking about going back to Chicago. Eleanor, tucking Emma into bed with the gentle authority of a grandmother, had stopped pretending this was temporary. They were all in this together now, for whatever time remained, measuring victory not in months or years but in school, plays attended, and promises kept, and the sound of a little girl's laughter echoing through a house that had learned to hold hope and heartbreak in equal measure. 2 years had passed since Dr. Singh had given Daniel 6 months to live, and Emma's 10th birthday party filled their backyard with the joyful chaos of children who believed in the permanence of good things. Daniel watched from a lawn chair that Michael had positioned in the shade, his once strong frame now fragile but his eyes bright, with the kind of happiness that comes from witnessing impossible things become everyday miracles. Emma darted between her friends like a butterfly, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she organized games of tag and supervised the elaborate treasure hunt that Eleanor had designed. Anna Rivera stood beside her like a loyal lieutenant, helping manage the younger children with the easy authority of a girl who'd grown up understanding that some families needed extra help to work properly. 2 years, Danny, Michael said quietly, settling into the chair beside his brother with 2 glasses of lemonade. 2 years since we thought. He didn't finish the sentence, but Daniel knew what he meant. 2 years since they'd all prepared to say goodbye, since Michael had brought legal documents instead of birthday presents, since the future had seemed like something that happened to other people. Dr. Singh had been honest about her amazement at Daniel's continued survival. The cancer remained, a constant presence in his body like a sleeping predator. But it had settled into a strange equilibrium that defied medical explanation. Some days were harder than others, weeks when the fatigue was overwhelming or when new symptoms sent them rushing to the emergency room. But the aggressive progression that everyone had expected simply hadn't materialized. "It's not a cure," Dr. Singh had explained during their last appointment, her careful words carrying both hope and caution. "But it's something we don't see often with pancreatic cancer. Your body seems to have found a way to coexist with the disease, at least for now. We'll keep monitoring, keep adjusting treatments as needed. But Daniel, this is remarkable." Emma appeared at Daniel's side with a paper plate loaded with birthday cake, the frosting slightly smeared from her enthusiastic distribution duties. "Daddy, Mrs. Peterson from school said she wants to talk to you about my drawings," she announced, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his chair. "She thinks I should enter the state art contest." Daniel's heart swelled with pride as he looked at his daughter, this remarkable little girl who'd turned his cancer journey into an ongoing art project. Her superhero drawings had evolved over the years, becoming more sophisticated but no less hopeful. The latest series featured a father and daughter team traveling through time, visiting all the moments they planned to share together. Graduations, birthdays, her wedding day, grandchildren that existed only in Emma's imagination but felt real enough to give Daniel reasons to keep fighting. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Daniel said, running his fingers through her hair. "What would you draw for the contest?" Emma's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this question. "I want to draw our family," she said, gesturing around the backyard where Michael was helping younger children with the treasure hunt, while Eleanor supervised the older kids at the craft table. "All of us together, because that's what makes me happy." As the afternoon wore on and parents began arriving to collect their children, Daniel found himself treasuring each ordinary moment. The way Emma hugged each friend goodbye, the careful pride with which she showed off the butterfly garden she and Eleanor had planted along the back fence, the comfortable ease with which she moved between the adults who'd become her extended family. That evening, after the party cleanup was finished and Emma had gone to bed surrounded by new stuffed animals and books, Daniel sat in his home office staring at a letter that had arrived earlier that week. It was from Emma's school, notification that she'd been selected for the district's gifted program, an opportunity that would challenge her academically, but also require more support than Daniel felt capable of providing in his current condition. "You're overthinking it," Eleanor said, appearing in the doorway with a cup of the herbal tea that had become Daniel's evening ritual. She developed an uncanny ability to sense when he was wrestling with difficult decisions, arriving with comfort and wisdom like a guardian angel in sensible shoes. "Am I?" Daniel accepted the tea gratefully, breathing in the soothing scent of chamomile and honey. "Eleanor, what if I can't keep up with her? What if she needs help with advanced math or science projects, and I'm too sick to be useful? What if you stop borrowing trouble from tomorrow and focus on what you can give her today?" Eleanor interrupted gently, settling into the chair across from his desk. "That little girl doesn't need a perfect father, Daniel. She needs the father she has. The one who kept his promise to stay alive long enough to see her 10th birthday, who never missed a school play, even when he had to watch from a wheelchair, who taught her that love means showing up even when it's hard." Daniel nodded, understanding the truth in her words even as his fears continued to whisper doubts in the quiet corners of his mind. Emma's academic success was just one of many milestones that lay ahead, each one a reminder of how much life he still wanted to experience with her. Middle school graduation, high school prom, college applications. A future that stretched beyond the 6 months Dr. Singh had originally given him but still felt fragile as spun glass. Later that night, as Daniel made his careful way to Emma's room for their nightly ritual of checking on her sleep, he found her sitting up in bed with a flashlight and a notebook, her face serious with concentration. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" he asked, settling on the edge of her bed with the slow movements that had become his new normal. "I'm making a list," Emma announced, showing him pages covered with her neat handwriting. "All the things we're going to do together. Anna says if you write down your wishes, they're more likely to come true." Daniel's throat constricted as he read over her list, a mixture of ordinary childhood desires and profound hopes that spoke to her understanding of their situation. Teach Daddy to paint with watercolors. Go camping like normal families. High school graduation with Daddy in the front row. Dancing at my wedding. "This is a wonderful list, Emma," Daniel managed, his voice thick with emotion. "But you know we can't control everything, right? Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan." Emma looked at him with the solemn expression she wore when discussing serious matters. "I know, Daddy, but Mrs. Johnson says hoping for good things isn't the same as expecting them. Hoping just means you believe good things are possible." She paused, studying his face in the soft glow of her nightlight. "And I believe good things are possible for us." As Daniel tucked his daughter back into bed and kissed her forehead, he felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and terror that had become his constant companions. 2 years beyond his expiration date, surrounded by a family that had grown from tragedy and love in equal measure, he was living in a space that medical science said shouldn't exist. But Emma's list, now tucked safely in his shirt pocket, felt like a roadmap to a future he was afraid to want but couldn't stop hoping for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Another treatment, another set of scans, another conversation with Dr. Singh about managing expectations while nurturing hope. Tonight, though, he was simply a father whose daughter believed in the impossible, and that felt like miracle enough. The cancer might be winning the war inside his body, but here in Emma's bedroom, surrounded by superhero drawings and birthday presents and the sound of her peaceful breathing, Daniel Carter was discovering that some victories were measured not in years but in moments, not in cures but in the courage to keep making lists of impossible dreams and believing they might yet come true. The call came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, 5 years after Daniel's original diagnosis, shattering the fragile peace their family had built around his stable condition. Emma, now 12 and sleeping in the room down the hall, didn't wake when the phone rang, but Daniel knew from the tremor in Dr. Singh's voice that their borrowed time was about to become very expensive. "We need you to come in immediately," Dr. Singh said, her usually composed tone carrying an urgency that made Daniel's blood run cold. "The latest scans show significant changes. The cancer has become aggressive again, and we need to start treatment right away." Daniel sat on the edge of his bed in the darkness, the phone heavy in his hand as he absorbed words that felt like a death sentence being read for the second time. 5 years. They'd had 5 years of birthdays and school plays. Of Emma growing from a frightened 7-year-old into a confident 12-year-old who played violin and wrote poetry and believed with absolute certainty that her father would always find a way to keep his promises. By morning, their house had transformed back into the medical command center it had been during those first terrible months. Michael, who'd moved permanently to town and bought a small house 3 blocks away, appeared before breakfast with his laptop and a thermos of coffee, ready to coordinate insurance calls and treatment schedules with the efficiency of someone who'd learned this routine too well. Eleanor arrived minutes later with a suitcase packed for Emma and a grim expression that she tried to hide behind busy activity. "Is Daddy going to die now?" Emma asked with a directness that had always characterized her approach to difficult truths. She sat at the kitchen table in her school uniform, her violin case beside her chair, and her homework spread out like any other morning, but her green eyes held a maturity that no 12-year-old should possess. Daniel pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of rosin from her violin strings. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, feeling her small body tense against his chest. "But I know I'm going to fight as hard as I can, just like I promised you I would." The new round of treatments was more aggressive than anything Daniel had endured before. Dr. Singh spoke in careful terms about experimental protocols and combination therapies, clinical language that couldn't disguise the fact that they were throwing everything they had at a cancer that had awakened from its 5-year sleep-hungry and determined to finish what it had started. Emma approached this latest battle with a maturity that broke Daniel's heart. She organized her own school schedule around his treatment days, arranging rides with Anna's family and setting up study groups that wouldn't require his help. Her violin practice, once a source of occasional conflict over timing and dedication, became a form of meditation that filled the house with music even during the darkest days. "She's playing for you," Eleanor observed one evening as Emma worked through a particularly complex piece in the living room, her bow moving across the strings with a precision that spoke of hours of dedicated practice. "Listen to how she phrases those difficult passages. She's pouring all her worry and love into that music." Daniel, weak from that day's chemotherapy but determined to listen to Emma's evening practice, felt tears sliding down his cheeks as he recognized the truth in Eleanor's words. The melody Emma was playing seemed to carry all the conversations they couldn't have, all the fears they couldn't voice, all the love that had sustained them through 5 years of borrowed time. The physical toll of this new treatment regimen was immediate and brutal. Daniel's hair, which had grown back during his stable years, fell out again within weeks. His appetite disappeared entirely, and even the anti-nausea medications that had helped before seemed powerless against the waves of sickness that left him bedridden for days at a time. But it was the emotional toll that proved most challenging. Michael, who'd learned to hide his worry behind practical action, spent long nights on the phone with insurance companies and specialists, his voice carrying a desperation that he tried to keep hidden from Emma. Eleanor, who'd been their rock through every crisis, seemed to age years in a matter of weeks, her usual optimism tempered by the reality of what a relapse after 5 years typically meant. Emma, however, surprised them all with her resilience. Instead of withdrawing or becoming clingy as she had during his first illness, she seemed to grow stronger, more determined to create normalcy in the spaces between his treatments. She learned to make his favorite soup, practiced violin with renewed intensity, and began keeping a journal that she said was for later, when Daddy's better and wants to remember everything. One evening in December, as Daniel lay in bed listening to Emma practice a Christmas carol on her violin, he heard her voice calling softly from the hallway, "Daddy, can I come in? I want to show you something." She appeared in his doorway holding her journal, a composition book covered in stickers and doodles that had become her constant companion over the past month. "I've been writing down all the good things," she explained, settling carefully on the edge of his bed. "All the reasons why you have to keep fighting." As she read aloud from her journal, entries about his laugh, about the way he still helped with her math homework even when he was exhausted, about the promise he'd made to walk her down the aisle someday, Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. Not the cancer, which continued its relentless assault on his body, but something deeper, a renewed sense of purpose that had nothing to do with medical statistics and everything to do with a 12-year-old girl who refused to give up on her father. "Emma," he said when she finished reading, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you know that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay, right? Uncle Michael and Mrs. Johnson, they'll always—" "Stop," Emma interrupted, closing her journal with a snap and fixing him with a look that was pure determination. "Stop talking like you're going to leave me. You promised me you'd walk me down the aisle, and I still believe you, even if you don't believe it yourself right now." That night, as Daniel lay awake listening to the winter wind rattle their windows, he thought about the strange arithmetic of hope. 5 years ago, he'd been given 6 months. 3 years ago, they'd celebrated making it past the original timeline. Now, facing a relapse that could steal away everything they'd gained, he realized that time wasn't just something you survived. It was something you filled with meaning, with love, with promises that became the foundation for miracles. The cancer might be winning again, might be reclaiming territory it had temporarily surrendered. But in the room down the hall, Emma was sleeping peacefully, her journal on the nightstand and her violin case beside her bed, dreaming of a future where promises kept could overcome any diagnosis. And somehow, in the face of her unwavering faith, Daniel found the strength to believe that their story wasn't over yet. Tomorrow would bring another treatment, another day of fighting an enemy that seemed determined to have the last word. But tonight, surrounded by a family that had chosen love over fear and hope over statistics, Daniel Carter prepared to prove once again that some promises were too important to break, no matter what the medical textbooks said about second chances and borrowed time. The remission came slowly this time, measured not in dramatic recoveries but in small victories that accumulated like snowflakes building into something substantial. By Emma's 15th birthday, Daniel had stabilized again, though the toll of his second battle with cancer had left him frailer than before, his movements careful and deliberate, his energy precious as rationed gold. Emma had grown into a young woman whose beauty came not just from her inherited features, but from a depth of character forged in the crucible of her father's illness. She moved through her teenage years with a grace that seemed to skip the typical adolescent angst, as if she understood that time was too valuable to waste on trivial rebellions. "I want to be a doctor," she announced one evening at dinner, her statement delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who'd found her calling. Specifically, an oncologist, like Dr. Singh. Daniel looked up from his careful portion of soup, studying his daughter's face in the warm light of their dining room. At 15, Emma had her mother's green eyes and auburn hair, but her expression carried a determination that was entirely her own. "That's a big commitment, sweetheart. Medical school, residency, it's a long road." "I know," Emma said simply, "but I want to help families like ours. I want to give other kids hope that their parents can beat the odds." She paused, glancing around the table at Michael and Eleanor, who'd become as much family as blood relatives. "I want to study the people who survive when they're not supposed to, and figure out why." Michael, now graying at the temples and bearing the comfortable weight of someone who'd found his true calling as a caregiver rather than a corporate climber, smiled at his niece with evident pride. "That's exactly the kind of research the world needs," he said. "Your dad's case has always been unusual, even Dr. Singh admits that. Maybe you'll be the one to figure out what makes some people different." The years that followed Emma's declaration became a careful dance of planning for a future that Daniel wasn't sure he'd live to see. They visited colleges together, Daniel insisting on accompanying Emma despite his fatigue, determined to be part of these milestone moments. At each campus, he watched his daughter evaluate pre-med programs with the serious attention of someone who understood that dreams required both passion and practical preparation. "She's remarkable," commented the admissions counselor at Emma's top-choice university after their interview. "I've never met a 17-year-old with such clarity about her goals. She spoke about her research interests like someone who's already spent years in the field." Daniel felt a complex mixture of pride and sadness as he watched Emma navigate these conversations. She was remarkable, but her clarity came from experiences that no child should have needed to develop. Her research interests were born from sitting in oncology waiting rooms, her passion for medicine forged in the fires of watching her father fight for his life over and over again. Emma's senior year of high school brought a bittersweet intensity to their daily routines. Daniel attended every concert where she played first-chair violin, every academic awards ceremony where she collected scholarships and honors, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she practiced in their living room. He'd learned to treasure the mundane moments as much as the milestone ones, understanding that a life measured in borrowed time made every day feel both precious and fragile. "Are you nervous about college?" Anna asked one afternoon as the two girls studied together at the kitchen table. Anna had grown into a loyal friend who understood the unique pressures of Emma's situation, offering support without pity and normalcy without pretense. "Not about college," Emma replied, her attention focused on her calculus homework but her meaning clear to everyone in the room. "I'm nervous about leaving Daddy. What if something happens while I'm away?" Daniel, reading in his chair nearby, felt his heart constrict at the worry in his daughter's voice. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but the approach of her departure made it more urgent, more loaded with fears that couldn't be easily dismissed. "Emma," he said gently, setting down his book and moving to sit beside her at the table, "we've talked about this. You can't put your life on hold because of my health. That's not what I've been fighting for all these years." "But what if?" Emma started, but Daniel interrupted her with a gesture that had become familiar over the years, a gentle touch that meant, "Trust me, listen to what I'm really saying. What if you go to college, study hard, become the doctor you're meant to be, and help save other families like ours?" Daniel asked. "What if you take everything you've learned from watching me fight this disease and use it to give other kids the hope that you've given me? Wouldn't that be a better way to honor what we've been through together?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You really think you'll be okay while I'm gone?" Daniel smiled, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that dated back to her childhood. "Sweetheart, I've been living on borrowed time for almost 10 years now. I've learned not to make promises about tomorrow. But I can promise you this. Whether I'm here or not, you're going to be extraordinary. And everything I've fought for, every day I've stayed alive past what the doctors expected, it's all been worth it because I got to watch you become the amazing person you are." Emma's high school graduation was everything Daniel had dreamed of during those first dark months after his diagnosis. She walked across the stage as valedictorian, her speech about resilience and hope bringing the entire auditorium to tears. Daniel sat in the front row, flanked by Michael and Eleanor, his body weak but his heart full as he watched his daughter accept her diploma and her future with equal grace. That night, as they celebrated with cake and photos in their backyard, Emma pulled Daniel aside for a private moment under the string lights that Eleanor had hung for the occasion. "Thank you," she said simply, her arms around his neck in a hug that felt like both hello and goodbye. "For what?" Daniel asked, though he thought he knew. "For keeping your promise," Emma whispered, "for staying long enough to see this. For teaching me that love is stronger than fear and that hope isn't about knowing what's going to happen. It's about believing that good things are possible even when everything seems impossible." As Daniel held his daughter under the evening stars, surrounded by the sounds of celebration and the warmth of family, he realized that he'd already received everything he'd prayed for during those first terrible months after his diagnosis. He'd been there for Emma's childhood, her adolescence, her graduation. He'd watched her grow from a frightened 7-year-old into a confident young woman ready to take on the world. The future remained uncertain. His health was stable but fragile, and medical science still couldn't explain why he'd survived so far beyond his original prognosis. But tonight, with Emma about to embark on her own journey and their family stronger than ever, despite everything they'd endured, Daniel Carter felt like the luckiest man alive. He'd been given 10 years of borrowed time, and he'd filled every day with love, hope, and the kind of ordinary miracles that happened when a father refused to break a promise to his daughter. Whatever came next, he knew they'd face it together, connected by bonds that no disease could break, and sustained by a love that had already proven stronger than any medical prediction. 8 years had passed since Emma left for college, and Daniel Carter stood in the master bedroom of their small house on Maple Street, his reflection in the antique mirror telling the story of a man who had lived far beyond anyone's expectations. At 57, he bore the marks of 15 years of fighting cancer. The gauntness that never quite left despite his stable condition, the careful way he moved to conserve energy, the ever-present tremor in his hands that came from years of treatments. But his eyes held the quiet satisfaction of someone who had kept an impossible promise. Today was Emma's wedding day. "Hold still, Danny," Michael said, his fingers working to adjust Daniel's tie with the patient concentration of someone who'd helped his brother dress for countless medical appointments over the years. "You're shaking more than usual." "I'm not nervous about the cancer," Daniel admitted, his voice carrying the hoarse quality that had become permanent after his last round of treatment. "I'm nervous about walking. What if I can't make it down the aisle? What if I collapse in front of everyone?" Michael stepped back, studying his brother's appearance with the critical eye of someone who'd become expert at reading the subtle signs of Daniel's condition. The dark suit hung a bit loose on Daniel's frame, but he looked distinguished, dignified, ready for the most important walk of his life. "You've been practicing with physical therapy for months," Michael reminded him, "and I'll be right there beside you if you need support. Besides, have you forgotten who you're walking with? Emma would carry you down that aisle herself if she had to." From downstairs came the sound of laughter and voices as the house filled with family and friends preparing for the ceremony. Eleanor, now 82 but still formidable in her organizational skills, was coordinating the final details with the efficiency of a military general. Anna, Emma's maid of honor, could be heard giving instructions to the younger bridesmaids, her voice carrying the same authoritative kindness that had characterized her friendship with Emma since childhood. "Daddy?" Emma's voice called from the hallway, followed by a gentle knock on the bedroom door. "Can I come in? I want to see you before we go to the church." Daniel's breath caught as Emma entered the room in her wedding dress, a vision of beauty that seemed to blur the line between the frightened 7-year-old who'd once promised to help him fight the cancer and the confident 25-year-old woman she'd become. Her auburn hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her mother's emerald earrings, and her dress was simple but perfect, flowing around her like captured moonlight. "Oh, sweetheart," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking with emotion as he took in the sight of his daughter on her wedding day. "You look just like your mother." Emma's eyes filled with tears that she carefully blinked away, not wanting to disturb her makeup. "Do you really think so? I wish she could be here today." "She is here," Daniel said, reaching out to take Emma's hands in his own. "She is in your eyes, in your smile, in the way you've grown into exactly the kind of woman she would have been proud to call her daughter." He paused, studying her face with the intensity of someone memorizing a moment. "I can't believe I'm actually here for this. There were so many times I thought—" "But you are here," Emma interrupted gently. "You kept your promise, Daddy, just like you said you would." She squeezed his hands, careful not to grip too tightly, but needing the connection. "Dr. Singh said she's never seen anything like your case. 15 years past your original diagnosis, and you're stable enough to walk me down the aisle." Daniel smiled, remembering the conversation with Dr. Singh just the week before. She'd become more than their doctor over the years. She was family, a witness to the miracle of his survival and Emma's strength. "She also said she wants to write a paper about us," he added, "about the role that hope and love might play in treatment outcomes." "Are you going to let her?" Emma asked, though she knew the answer. Her father had always been willing to share their story if it might help other families facing similar battles. "Of course, if our experience can give hope to one other father who gets told he has 6 months to live, then everything we've been through will have been worth it." The drive to the church passed in comfortable silence, Daniel and Emma sitting together in the back of Michael's car while Eleanor rode in front, occasionally turning around to fuss with Emma's veil or offer last-minute reminders about the ceremony. The autumn afternoon was perfect. Crisp air and brilliant blue sky that made the changing leaves seem to glow with inner light. At the church, as Daniel stood in the small room off the sanctuary where the wedding party was making final preparations, he could hear the murmur of guests taking their seats. Many of these people had been part of their journey. Teachers from Emma's school, families from their neighborhood, medical professionals who'd become friends, co-workers who'd covered for Daniel during his countless treatment days. 5 minutes, Anna announced, appearing in the doorway with her maid of honor's bouquet and a smile that carried 15 years of shared history. "Emma, Your groom is looking a little nervous, but in a good way, and the church is packed. I think half the town came to see this." Daniel felt his legs tremble slightly as he prepared for the walk that had been his goal for 15 years. Emma noticed immediately, slipping her arm through his with the same protective instinct she'd shown as a child. "We'll go slow," she whispered. "And if you need to stop, we'll stop. There's no rush." As the music began and the sanctuary doors opened, Daniel looked down the aisle toward the altar, where Emma's fiancé waited with a smile that spoke of his understanding of what this moment meant. The church was indeed packed, filled with faces that reflected joy, amazement, and the kind of love that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't have been possible but somehow was. "Ready, Daddy?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Daniel straightened his shoulders, drawing strength from his daughter's presence and from the knowledge that he had somehow miraculously made it to this moment. "I've been ready for 15 years, he said. And together father and daughter began the walk that transformed a promise made in desperation into a moment of pure triumph, each step of victory over time, disease, and every statistic that had said this day would never come. The cancer might still be there, dormant but present, but today it didn't matter. Today, Daniel Carter was simply a father walking his daughter toward her future, keeping the most important promise he'd ever made. The aisle seemed both endless and too short, each step carrying the weight of 15 years of borrowed time but also the lightness of dreams finally realized. As they reached the altar and Daniel placed Emma's hand in her groom's, he felt a sense of completion that no medical scan could measure. A healing that had nothing to do with cancer cells and everything to do with love's power to overcome the impossible. "I told you I'd be here," he whispered to Emma as he kissed her cheek, and her radiant smile in response was worth every day of pain, every sleepless night, every moment of fear they'd endured to reach this perfect, impossible moment. The sanctuary fell into complete silence as the traditional wedding march began, 300 guests rising to their feet as the doors at the back of the church opened to reveal Daniel Carter and his daughter Emma, silhouetted against the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows. For a moment that seemed suspended outside of time, father and daughter stood poised at the threshold of a moment that 15 years ago had seemed impossible. Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but it wasn't from the exertion of standing or the weight of his formal suit. It was from the overwhelming realization that he was actually here, actually living the moment he'd promised Emma in a hospital room when she was 7 years old and he'd been given 6 months to live. The aisle stretched before them like a bridge between the life they'd built together and the future Emma would create with the man waiting at the altar, his face glowing with love and anticipation. Emma's arm was steady through his, her strength supporting him as much as his was guiding her, and Daniel could feel the slight tremor in her fingers that matched his own. This wasn't just a walk down the aisle, it was a victory lap, a public declaration that love could triumph over medical statistics, that promises made in desperation could become miracles realized through sheer stubborn hope. "Just like we practiced," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the music but carrying all the comfort of 15 years of shared battles, one step at a time. They began to move, and Daniel was amazed at how natural it felt despite his body's fragility. His legs, weakened by years of treatments and the constant battle against cancer, found strength he didn't know he still possessed. Emma's pace was perfectly calibrated to his capabilities, neither rushing nor dawdling, simply moving forward with the measured grace of someone who understood that this journey was about more than reaching the destination. As they passed the first row of pews, Daniel caught sight of faces that told the story of their 15-year journey. Dr. Singh sat in the third row, her usually composed professional demeanor cracked by tears that spoke to her amazement at being witness to a medical miracle she'd never quite believed possible. Janet, the oncology nurse who'd taped Emma's first superhero drawing to his IV pole all those years ago, was there with her family, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while her husband squeezed her hand in understanding. In the front row, Michael stood with his shoulders squared and his face set in the careful expression of someone trying not to break down completely. Beside him, Eleanor held a handkerchief to her face, her gray hair perfectly styled for the occasion, but her composure entirely undone by the sight of the man she'd helped raise from the ashes of his diagnosis, walking his daughter toward her future. Anna, resplendent in her maid of honor dress, stood at the altar watching their approach with a smile that seemed to contain the joy of their entire shared childhood. She'd been there for so many of the moments that had led to this one, sitting in hospital waiting rooms during Emma's elementary school years, celebrating each anniversary of Daniel's survival, watching Emma grow from a frightened child into a confident young woman who'd chosen to dedicate her life to fighting the disease that had shaped theirs. But it was the faces in the congregation that moved Daniel most deeply. There were the neighbors who'd brought casseroles during his worst treatment days, the teachers who'd given Emma extra support when his illness made normal parenting impossible, the co-workers who'd covered his shifts at Morrison Electric when he was too sick to work. There were other cancer patients and families he'd met along the way, people who'd drawn hope from his unlikely survival, and who'd come to witness the fulfillment of the promise that had sustained them all. Halfway down the aisle, Daniel's steps faltered slightly as a wave of fatigue washed over him. For a terrifying moment, he thought his legs might give out entirely, that he might collapse in front of everyone and turn Emma's perfect day into a medical emergency. But Emma's grip tightened on his arm, and he heard her voice, soft but fierce, "We're almost there, Daddy. You can do this." And somehow, he could. The stumble lasted only a second before his legs found their strength again, and they continued forward to a spontaneous round of applause from the congregation. It wasn't applause for the bride, though Emma was radiant in her beauty. It was applause for a man who'd refused to let cancer have the last word, for a daughter who'd never stopped believing in miracles, for a family that had proven love could rewrite medical textbooks. As they reached the altar, Emma's groom stepped forward to receive his bride, but his first words were directed at Daniel. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here, for keeping your promise to her, for showing all of us what it means to never give up." Daniel nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady, and turned to face his daughter for their final moment as just the two of them. Emma's eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was radiant as she reached up to adjust his tie one last time, a gesture that carried echoes of all the times she'd helped him prepare for medical appointments and treatment sessions. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. Her words meant only for him despite the hundreds of people watching. "Thank you for staying, thank you for fighting, thank you for keeping every single promise you ever made to me." "I love you too, sweetheart," Daniel replied, his voice breaking as he kissed her forehead. "And I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Your mother would be proud too." As Daniel took his seat in the front pew beside Michael and Eleanor, he felt a profound sense of completion wash over him. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the promises that bind people together through all of life's challenges. But Daniel found himself thinking about a different kind of promise. The desperate vow he'd made to a 7-year-old girl in a hospital corridor 15 years ago. 6 months, Dr. Singh had said. 6 months had become 15 years. And those years had been filled with more love, more joy, more ordinary, miraculous moments than he'd ever dared to hope for during those first dark days after his diagnosis. He'd been there for Emma's first day of middle school, her high school graduation, her college acceptance, her medical school interviews. He'd watched her grow from a frightened child into a compassionate young woman who was going to spend her life helping other families fight the battles they'd fought together. The cancer was still there, still a part of his daily reality, still capable of reasserting itself without warning. But today, watching Emma exchange vows with the man who loved her, Daniel Carter felt nothing but gratitude for every borrowed day, every stolen moment, every impossible year he'd been given beyond his original expiration date. As the ceremony concluded and Emma and her new husband were pronounced married, the congregation erupted in celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the small church. Daniel stood with everyone else, his legs steady now, his heart full to overflowing as he watched his daughter begin the next chapter of her story. The promise was kept. The aisle was walked. The miracle was complete. And in that moment of pure joy, surrounded by the people who'd helped make the impossible possible, Daniel Carter understood that he'd already received everything he'd ever prayed for, and more than he'd ever dreamed possible when he'd first heard the words, 6 months to live. Love had won, hope had triumphed, and a father's promise, made in desperation and kept through sheer determination, had become the foundation for a love story that would inspire everyone who witnessed it to believe in miracles of their own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.